Do you know what still trips me out sometimes? Showering. You know why? You get in the shower and it's all hot, and then when you step onto the floor of your bathroom, usually tile, like ceramic, it feels very cold, doesn't it? But your carpet doesn't feel cold. The tile and the carpet are the exact same temperature. They have to be. It's air temperature. So why does the tile feel colder? It's because heat transfers out of your body and into the tile faster than it does on another medium like carpet, with a lot of air pockets in between all the little pieces of fiber. Which means, do we even really feel the temperature of things? Do we only just feel the difference in temperature of things? Most people sing in the shower. I think about how my heat's flowing out. Hello and welcome to another edition of Because Science Footnotes, the show where I like to extend the nerdy conversation we have around all of the Because Science things that we get up to here on this channel. I take your comments and questions and corrections and use them to round out the Because Science experience, to take the oblate spheroid that is me and make it more into a sphere. I'm oblate because I spin about my minor axis and it makes my middle pod go out. No, but that's what the Earth shape is. So on the last episode, because the Earth why are you laughing? So on the last episode of Because Science, we went into the draft and we were trying to figure out why it takes two brains, this thinking meat, hashtag thinking meat, why it takes 3 kilograms of thinking meat and not 1.5 kilograms to operate a Pacific Rim Jaeger. I said it had nothing to do with common myths about brain capacity like the 10% myth or left brain or right brain dominance. That's not true about how humans work. I said it has more to do with extending the attentional resources of combined pilot consciousnesses, and I think it would give the pilots' combined brains a larger repertoire of hardwired, so to speak, actions like the best musicians or athletes have. But what did you have to say? Well, I am impressed with a lot of your interactions in the comment sections, especially on YouTube this week. A lot of discussion, a lot of corrections happening, which was awesome. A lot of your own math doing, which I always support. There were tons of comments, and I cannot feature them all here. There are hundreds. So make sure you get in early so it makes the likelihood that I see them go up. But although I cannot feature every comment, I do read almost every single comment in the first few hours after posting, so get in there quick. So our first comment comes from Sheol IK, who says, but on the topic, wouldn't it be more beneficial to place pilots in different parts of the mech? Jaegers are pretty big. The distance signals must travel from the pilot to cabin to every other part of the Jaeger must be insane. Wouldn't it be more beneficial to just spread out the specialized pilots in either... We can stop there. Very interesting comment. One of the commenters, like I said, had a great rebuttal. Son of Zeus Gaming says, well, Power Rangers had 5 or 6 pilots. Good point. But seriously, the closer you are to each other in this orientation inside of a robot, with human brains, the better. Did you know that a GPU starts losing performance if you're using cables to extend how far it is away from other parts of the computer? You can start losing performance over distance, which is a great point. If you were in a Jaeger, you would have to account for the fact that you actually have to wire the foot to the brain, and that might be 300 feet or 100 meters apart. And over that distance, you could have performance loss, which is something that you would have to account for. Mother Nature has to account for this in some way in its largest creatures, like in whales. The blue whale is the largest creature to ever be on the Earth, ever, at least by length and organism. There's like trees and funguses that are underneath the forget it. The blue whale is so big that the amount of time it would take if you touched its tail and its nose at the same time, because firing speeds for neurons are only a certain velocity, it could take almost a third of a second to get nerve signals from the tail, for example, of a blue whale to its brain. Evolution had to have accounted for that, or else reaction time for whales would be all off. And you could touch its nose and its tail and they wouldn't feel simultaneous. It would feel different. So weird. Now, I can't say that evolution actually did account for this. I'm not a whale. But it probably did something like that, because for humans, our brains sync up the inputs of our bodies so that even though they are not actually simultaneous, they feel simultaneous. Here, do this. Take your finger and touch the tip of your nose. Boop. Like this. Now, the tip of my finger, the signals have to travel from my finger through my arm down up into my brain, while the signals from my nose travel from my nose to my brain. Those cannot be the same travel times. They just physically can't. So your brain buffers those inputs to make them feel simultaneous. TV engineers do the same thing. Audio and video can be slightly out of sync, up to 100 milliseconds, and you don't even notice. It also means you live in the past and free will is an illusion, but we can get into that later. Our next comment comes from Ronindrix, who says, piloting anything with as complicated machinery as a Jaeger is a difficult task, especially while also having to deal with battlefield tactics. Ronindrix goes on to say that the drift could be a way of making quick crew communication possible, which I think is a great point and gets to the implicit memory that I mentioned in the episode. If you can perform tasks without even thinking about them, if you could communicate with the other pilot without even thinking about it consciously, then it would speed up the reaction times that you have, and it would shorten the amount of time you have between receiving a stimulus and reacting to that stimulus, which would be very important if a giant monster with a knife for a face was about to kill your brother. Yancey, he was taken from me. The more I think about the past, I haven't thought about the future. Our next comment comes from Lee Tietzel, who says, if that wasn't enough helicopters for Gypsy Danger's mass, 1,980 tons, what would have been enough helicopters? So at the beginning of my episode, I was brought in by 4 helicopters, as Jaegers are on Pacific Rim 1, and I said that's definitely not enough helicopters. How many helicopters would it take? Well, I don't really have to do that math, because 2 other commenters, good on you, jumped into the comments. Hector and Trainer JB said, based on Chinook helicopters, around 160, 165? It checks out. Chinook model helicopters can lift anywhere between 10,000 and 50,000 pounds, which means you're going to have helicopters in that range. Dozens, if not hundreds or more helicopters. So imagine that scene in Pacific Rim 1 again, where there's 160 helicopters all lifting a Jaeger to its destination. I think it would look even cooler, but it probably cost too much graphically. Nice comment. Our next comment comes from Mr. Shah, who says, hey Kyle, big fan. I know, I featured one of your comments before. Question, why does Ant-Man get slower as he gets bigger, but Jaegers don't? Aren't Jaegers just like giant human? Well, I get this question a lot, and I think giant humanoid things moving slowly is just a relative motion illusion. So it looks like, you know, Titans from Attack on Titan and Ant-Man when he's giant Ant-Man, and Jaegers move slowly, like they're moving slowly. But relatively speaking, consider how much distance their limbs, although they look like they're moving slowly, cover in a certain amount of time. So each step from a Jaeger is covering what? 25 meters, 50 meters, a lot of space in not a lot of time. If every Jaeger step, for example, is covering 100 meters, but it takes 2 seconds to do it, it looks slow. But that's still 50 meters per second of velocity. It's like 55 miles an hour. That's really fast. So in actuality, if you do the math, these objects are moving very fast, relatively speaking, but they look like they're moving slowly. It's an illusion, kind of. Our next comment comes from Ninja Bear Films, who says, even if a kaiju had a hide or a thick enough skull to resist puncture by bullets, wouldn't they still provide enough force to concuss it as its brain into a coma? Well, I would answer your comment, but you super nerds are jumping into the comments, which I love. Justin Thompson says, well, since kaiju are so massive, and by extension their heads, the acceleration their heads undergo would likely be negligible. Ergo, the brain does not collide with the skull, ergo, no concussion. That's exactly right. A kaiju is hundreds of feet tall, 100 meters tall, and so it's going to be very, very massive. Hundreds, if not thousands of tons, which means that the force that a single bullet or even a whole barrage of bullets would apply to its head, force equals mass times acceleration. That force is not enough to accelerate that much mass very quickly. And like Justin Thompson points out, without a lot of acceleration to the head, there's not a lot of head movement and therefore no concussion. You're exactly right. Good comment. Our next comment comes from Nowen, it's all caps, who says, if we took the knowledge we learned from the last Because Science, nice, on how smart boy Isaac Newton's third law works, then when punching a kaiju with a Jaeger, it could only happen once. The force would be so great because of the mass, and it would destroy the arm or push the Jaeger onto its back. It's fine. You're absolutely right, but I would caution you in remembering that everything scales up. So like I said in the superhuman punching episode, or the super strength episode, that a lot of people had a problem with apparently, is that Newton's third law is always present. There is no force that exists without an equal and opposite force occurring instantaneously when you apply it to some object. Now, I still get emails about this episode saying you wouldn't fly backwards because these quote unquote cancel out. But that's not quite true, is it? What I am saying is that if something with not a lot of mass punches with superhuman or mecha style force, then the forces that are instantaneously generated at that body will be enough to send them flying. That's why boxers don't fly backwards when they punch each other, because they're only supplying a few thousand newtons, and if you weigh 100 kilograms, a big boxer, your weight on Earth, at least, is already in the 1,000 Newton range. So friction can cover the rest of that, so they don't fly backwards. But if you are a 100 kilogram person and you punch with 100 times that force, 10,000 newtons or 100,000 newtons, then that's going to be enough force to accelerate you backwards. That's what I'm talking about. So for Jaegers, wouldn't that be the same? Not quite, because the mass, as I said, scales up. They are punching with hundreds of thousands of newtons of force, or millions, I haven't calculated it in a long time, but their mass is also going to be massive. These are 100-meter tall robots that are going to be very, very heavy, so everything scales up, such that the forces that are being applied to these robots' arms aren't going to accelerate their masses that much because their masses are so much heavier. Assuming that their arms wouldn't totally shatter. It could, though. So think of a Jaeger punching a kaiju like two large boxers punching each other. The same scale of forces is happening there. Now I want to see two giant rock'em sock'em robots. Our next comment comes from Geno Passiano, who says, I'm going to read this quickly in full because it's a good one. In order for the Jaeger to move, it has to interpret the pilot's thoughts and discern a command. Connecting brains to computers is difficult. Perfection is unlikely. We might compare their thought recognition software to our best speech recognition software. The best that Google's had was a 4.9% error rate. That's pretty good. But if Jaegers misinterpreted commands 5% of the time, they wouldn't last very long. Assume that the Jaeger receives two commands and has an additional predictive software to guess which one is correct. The likelihood that it misinterprets two commands consecutively then is just 0.25%. By adding one more pilot, the machine has cut its error rate to the old error rate squared, in this case reducing errors by up to 95%. In that case, the main purpose of the BrainLink software is to ensure pilots are sending the same commands. Wow, that sounds really cool. That sounds like you're a Jaeger engineer who has thought this through, and I really appreciate that. That's a fascinating Not just that they're adding more capacity by having two brains, but they're ensuring that the right commands are sent to the giant Jaeger because of the software that they have to install for BMIs, or brain-machine interfaces. Cool. Cool thinking. Next comment comes from Katie Taylor, who says, my son Garrett just turned 8 last week and he absolutely admires you. We watch every BS episode together. He says he wants to be an engineer when he grows up, but I know it won't be easy. Could you give him some encouragement and advice? I know it would really leave its mark. Thank you. Hey Garrett, thank you so much for watching. I hope that it's fun, and I love that you and your mom watch the show together. That's great. And I love that you want to be an engineer when you grow up. We need those. But your mom is right. It's going to be hard. I went into engineering in school, and I'm not smarter than anyone else. I'm not smarter than anyone who watches this show. I just took it really, really seriously. I studied hard and I focused because I knew that later on in life, taking education seriously would be really important. Sometimes when you're in school, it feels like studying really hard is just a pain and it's not worth it. But later on in life, it is. So if you take education really seriously, I know it can make a difference later on in life. And if you do the same, Garrett, I think you can make a big difference later on in all of our lives. So stay nerdy and stay passionate. I believe in you, man. You can do it. My mom told me not to point at people so much. My mom was like, stop pointing, you look angry. The last comment, Mom, I love you, comes from Drunk Red Ninja, who says, so what you're saying is the second brain operation relies on muscle memory, kind of like how athletes operate, or even gamers can just react to, say, one-hit frames in the middle of death combos. Bit inside baseball there, buddy. But yes, think of how important it is to have hardwired actions in the mind when you're performing tasks that you have to react very quickly to, say baseball. So in baseball, some of the fastest baseball pitches have been clocked at 100 or over 100 miles per hour. And because of the distance between the mound, where the pitcher is, throwing at 100 miles per hour, and the home plate, who's at bat, that person literally has milliseconds, like 300 to 400 milliseconds to hit that ball. Human reaction time is on the order of 250 milliseconds, meaning there is almost no time at all for a batter to react to and see and follow the ball all the way to the bat and then hit it. The only explanation is that some of that motion is hardwired. They see the pitch, and they start the motion before the ball gets anywhere near the bat, and they don't actually follow the ball all the way to the bat. They are already swinging. They can't devote all that attentional resource to it because there's simply not enough time. It has to be hardwired. I make the same argument for Jaeger pilots. You cannot think about every action. Life comes at you fast. If you don't stop and hardwire your brain into something, you might get killed by a kaiju. So I think the best comment this week is going to go to Geno Paciano, who says all the cool stuff about speech recognition technology and brain-machine interfaces. That is a deep dive on something I did not even consider and is fascinating. Congratulations, Geno. You are a super nerd. Oh, too high. But of course, I'm not always right. I have trouble spelling the word because, even though it's literally in the show title. So what did I get wrong this week? Correction 1 comes from Ironic Dutch Moonshade, weird, who says, you made more mistakes in your car experiment. You didn't check the mirrors or turn on your turn signals. I live in LA. No one does that because I'm from the Midwest. People in LA drive like dumb dummies, dangerous dumb dummies. You know what they're not thinking about? Safety, not implicit. It's such a hassle driving here. Our next correction comes from Digetter, who says, hold up. If you are changing lanes by turning your wheel, far sharp enough that you have to turn the same amount in the opposite direction, not just straighten out, you are doing it wrong and or dangerously. So what Jaeger is talking about is a thought experiment I said to try in the last episode. You can try it right now if you haven't seen it. Close your eyes and imagine you're doing a lane change. What do you do with your hands? Most people just turn and then straighten out. If you do that, you are going to be headed for the ditch. You actually have to turn the wheel, and then once you're in the other lane, turn it back just as far and straighten out so that you're still on the path going straight that you want to, just in a different lane. 2 commenters actually jumped in and pointed this out. Herb Gory and My Mieli said the same thing, where mathematically you have to turn twice or else you will not be going straight. So they have corrections on top of corrections. I love it. I think I'm still right because I tried it on the highway when no one else was around me, and if you only turn the wheel once, you're not going to make it. Have to go twice. Our next correction comes from Rusco Collective, who says, so I'm watching this week's, that's a lot of math. I'm not going to read any of Rusco's correction. I'm just going to say go to the YouTube post for the last episode of Because Science, the Pacific Rim episode, and just look at all the math that he or she has done. I just want to highlight it because this is exactly what I do for all of these Because Science episodes. I make assumptions and then I do math and apply scientific principles that I think work. What I am doing is just trying to figure out cool and interesting ways to visualize it and communicate it to you. So, Rusco, nice correction. I don't know if I'm corrected because there's a whole lot there that I'm not going to go through because I don't have time, but good on you for doing all that math. It's the same thing that I do, only I have a show. Our next correction comes from Lich of Doom, who says, while I've been aware that multitasking is a myth, there comes a time when we need to define what a task is. You know, if you're picking up a glass of water, but the rest of your brain is still working on things like breathing and vision and performance of organs and such, isn't the brain multitasking in and of itself? Well, I think we define tasks as something that is consciously intended when we want to perform something. That's how psychologists measure it. They say, write down this number, or tell me this time, or something like that. It is something that you are intentionally doing. Your brain has a task of telling your body to not die all the time, but I don't think we can really consider that a conscious effort or an intentional effort. That's not really a task, which is why I said that if you have the training, for say a Jaeger pilot has a training to push down a task into subconscious, it becomes reflexive. You don't even have to think about it, and therefore they would become a better fighter, which I think gets to the rest of Lich of Doom's point, where he or she says, but again, what constitutes a task? Gamers are pressing multiple buttons on their controllers in several varying combinations over a matter of seconds while simultaneously keeping an eye on things like ammo, if applicable, their opponents, and even their own position. What you are describing is hardwired action. A gamer, someone who plays StarCraft, who can make 300 APM, actions per minute, which is crazy, can't think about consciously every single one of those actions. Some of them have to be reflexive, or else there's just not enough mental resources for them to happen. So I think in a roundabout way you prove my point. Woo! Our next correction comes from Mr. Freeman 012, and he has some problems with what I said. He says, I think that when Kyle hears you only use 10% of your brain, he thinks you only use 10% of your brain parts all the time. I'm pretty sure what the saying is trying to say that you use 10% of your brain power at a given moment. Seriously, why would it be the way that Kyle thinks it is, in which you could supposedly chop off 90% of the brain and you'd be fine? Come on, Kyle, get it together. We're talking about brain power here and not individual sections of the brain. And then he goes on to mention limitless twice. I think we have a fundamental disagreement in what we both mean, Mr. Freeman. You are arguing that brains aren't running at their full power. We use all of our brain, but we only use 10% of its power. What I am arguing, and what I think the common interpretation of the 10% myth is that we only use 10% of our brain that's unlocked, and there's 90% that we could use, but that 10% is still running at full power. And you mentioned limitless a couple times, saying that if we gave our brain more energy and more nutrients, it could run at higher than 10% power. It could run at 100% power. My point is that I'm not aware of any evidence to say that we are only using 10% of our brain's power. Evolution doesn't really work that way. Evolution works with what it has and uses the tools at its disposal to create and develop creatures that are best adapted to suit its environment. It doesn't just add on a bunch of potential resources to be used if only they had the right nutrition. That's not how nature works. That's like saying that mantis shrimpies could punch so much harder if only they unlocked that potential in themselves. No, they punch just as hard as they can because that's what they've been evolved to do. We think just as hard as we can because that's what we've been evolved to do. There's not some 90% just floating around in our minds just waiting for us to find the pill in Limitless. I mean, we probably could find ways to think better, faster, smarter, stronger, harder. But it's not just hidden potential there waiting to be unlocked, I don't think. Or do I think? 90% of the time. Our last correction comes from Ian Davis, who says, multitasking is a myth. What? Is playing guitar and singing while teaching someone to play guitar not multitasking? The episode is awesome. I think, Ian, if you play guitar and sing at the same time and try to teach someone to play guitar and sing at the same time, I think it may feel like multitasking to you because of exactly my point, because it is subconscious and hardwired for you. I've done this, so go back and try to remember the first time you tried to sing and strum at the same time. When you tried to sing and strum and make the chords with your fingers and you had to remember how to coordinate both and really, really focus on every single aspect of what you're doing, and it was choppy and bad, and you sounded like, nope, I'm not going to slag anyone off, but stop pointing. Remember when you were bad at doing both? That's my point. Until tasks become rote, until they become pushed, until tasks go underneath the conscious level so you don't have to think about them, it's hard to perform both without messing up one or being slow on everything that you're doing. That is why multitasking is a myth, because when you try to do more than one task consciously and intentionally, you mess up. Like me trying to sing Burning Down the House while doing that intro part. It's hard. Watch. A lot of good comments and corrections this week, but I think I'm giving it to Eb Gore. Congratulations, you are a super nerd. It wasn't even a correction to me. It was a correction to a correction. And that's second level, second order awesome. And I appreciate that. Congratulations. I mean, you didn't win anything, but I said your name. Now, if you are already subscribed to Alpha, projectalpha.com, where you can get this show 2 days before everyone else, not this one, but the main episodes of Because Science, don't worry about it. You already know what the next episode of Because Science is going to be because you've already seen it. But if you haven't signed up for Alpha yet, the next episode of Because Science is going to be how to create unlimited bling with science. More specifically, we are kind of going back into super strength, but not really. We are trying to figure out if someone with super strength, say Superman, could really do the common trope of squeezing coal or some other sediment into diamond. Can you squeeze coal into diamond? And if you could someone like Superman with super strength do it? Or would he have to use something else or do it differently? That's what's coming up next. Stop pointing! Sorry, Mom. So go watch the latest episode of Because Science if you haven't yet, and let me know your comments, questions, and corrections. I will be checking youtube.com/BecauseScience, facebook.com/BecauseScience, and @BecauseScience on Instagram and Twitter for all of those things everywhere, all the time. It's my whole life. Also, if you're in the California area this weekend, I will be at WonderCon moderating not one, but 2 panels, one on the Expanse and one on Pacific Rim. So if you are by that place, come by, that's what I was getting at, come by and say hello and we can fist bump, but only fist bump because it's more hygienic. I don't want a handshake or a hug. Don't get me sick. And don't forget, You've never been electrocuted, or else you'd be dead. That's what it means. Shocking, I know. Wordplay! But electrocuted means death by electrocution. You have to be shocked. Bye.